about some other ideas in innovation. I think when Paul Nazarick first asked me to come and talk, he was very intrigued with kind of the model that we put together over the last year or two, really on site ownership and who owns some of these long-term stewardship projects. And we have our company, Legacy Land Stewardship, a public benefit corp. We'll talk a little bit about what that is, and kind of our model for taking on ownership of long-term O&M type sites that are environmentally challenged. Mine sites and so forth fit right in with this. Again, we're trying to get us back on track here. I'll talk just a little bit about, what the sites are, the closed site dilemma, and then things that you can do for, pursuing innovation with technology. The big question always is, well, who owns the site and who's interested in doing some of this work and so forth, especially in these old, Superfund mining districts or, other mining districts that maybe aren't necessarily under CERCLA. But again, it's kind of who's going to hold on to that long-term ownership of the sites and be the custodial person for that. So we'll talk a little bit about what those sites are. We'll talk about a kind of our solution and what we've been doing, and we have kind of an interesting example here in Colorado where we've taken on old mine sites that have long-term drainage. So we're responsible now for the the O&M of those sites, and also under Superfund. We have a large uranium mill that we've taken on ownership, and we'll drive that through closure and kind of get it buttoned up using the, under the Superfund program. And then talk a little bit about, moving forward here. What we're really talking about is, when you have these closed sites, the mine sites, industrial sites, whatever, you kind of look at the whole population of them, and 80% of the sites really fall over on the left side of this, where there's little or no value. You may have some sites that have, some value either, there's a continued mineral resource, so you can continue to mine the property, and you're willing to take on some of those long-term obligations. There's another set that, maybe they aren't quite profitable, but with some other involvement, public money, you can make them, so forth. We see a lot of this in the brownfield world. And then there's everything else that's over on the far side that just, there's not much you're going to do with it. And you have the reluctant landowners that have to hold on to it, figure out what to do with it. It may be the old mine sites, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation here where you now have a Superfund overlap on it. What do you do with it? Those are really the sites that we're focused on with our model, is to try to find a new home and new uses and new ways to, kind of drive those projects forward. And typically on these type projects, where you're going to have somebody who comes in and wants to take on the long-term stewardship of it, you kind of have all these competing priorities. Who's going to do it? You come in and be that entity. You're now the owner of that problem, the owner of the project, and you really need to show some leadership in there as well, especially when you start pulling together, other stakeholders, and other involved parties, with that property. You're going to need some very creative deal structure, to make sure that you've, kind of taken care of a lot of the liability issues there are, some of the land holding issues. Certainly on the regulatory side, you're going to be inheriting a lot of permits, orders, licenses, and things like that. Implementing remedies. The one thing I've been very interested in hearing is all the different thoughts on technology and innovation. As a landowner who comes in and takes on a long-term program like that, it's one thing to just take on a traditional water treatment plant and run it, but we're really focused on what other kind of innovative things, treatment, new technologies, certainly on the mine side, or there's some things you can be doing, in situ, in the mine pool, in the mountain, or there's some, to help optimize that system. So again, all of a sudden, we take on the kind of responsibility for pushing those issues forward. Again, timing and accelerating the process. I think what we've found in some of the projects we take on, where there's still investigation work or remedy work, we're much more motivated to do that on a shorter time frame. It kind of gets down to this last bullet here on funding. To make our projects work, we really need to identify funding sources, whether it's coming from the reluctant landowners, for their way to turn it over to us and have them get as an exit point, or looking for other things to do with the project and the property that may, have different revenue generating points. Again, what we're looking at is once we have that, we can start accelerating some of the cleanup or some of these technology reviews and so forth. But the big thing for us on getting our deals done and so forth is the funding and the creative funding, and how do we make that work? Without that, most of the clients that we deal with, that turn properties over, they just won't be comfortable with that and won't do that. So I think, as Paul mentioned earlier, he said one of, the way we look at our company is as a dirty nature conservancy. And in some ways we really are. When we were looking at kind of that whole group of sites, the long-term closed mine sites, closed industrial sites, and so forth, where you're out there doing O&M for the next 20, 30 years, it really became, how does a company get comfortable turning it over to somebody like us? And we really looked at, as a nonprofit, a 501c3, but, to do that and then start generating money through different ways of monetizing the assets, it was really a tough way, to try to have a business as a nonprofit. And then we really started looking at the public benefit corporation. And how many in here know about public benefit corporations? We have a few. Do you work for one, or? Excellent. You're a rare person because not many people really know about the public benefit corporations and what they can do. One of the, it's been a corporate form that's been around probably for 7, 8 years or so. The majority of states have this on their statutes. It's another type company like a C Corp, an LLC, but it's called a public benefit corp. And what it really does, it allows you to, run your business. You certainly have to run it as a profitable company, but instead of being just focused on shareholder value and profitability, back to their shareholders, it also allows you to have a more public mission as part of your company. And it really gives protection to the officers, directors, and so forth to really pursue those more altruistic type missions of the company and not be at risk for, shareholder suits and so forth. But it also lets your employees and the outside world know that you are a different company. There are some parts that benefits back to society that are very important to your company, and you're going to run them that way. And really look to enhance those pieces of your business, as well as just being another company and and being viable for the viability of the company. So one way of looking at it is that it's you run as a regular for-profit, but you also have this socially beneficial purpose, that you kind of have a look and feel as a nonprofit as well. It's almost like a hybrid, if you will. But what it does is it really makes you look different and you operate different. So as a company taking on environmentally challenged properties and so forth, like we do for long-term stewardship, we're going to, first and foremost, make sure those properties are in compliance, with orders, permits, and so forth. But as we start looking for other things that we might do with those properties, we'll look for other things that have more of a benefit, or a socially, something back into society, So we really focus on some of our sites, like the closed mine sites, and I heard earlier, the solar potential, Can you, start looking for solar development, wind on some properties. We're looking at some up in Wyoming, and wind is a very important one up there. Also, wetland and habitat. We look as we close these sites up, can we enhance the habitat of the site? Is there a wetlands banking potential here, a habitat banking, and so forth? Again, it's another way of monetizing assets of that property to help offset the long-term holding costs and O&M costs. Again, public recreational uses. We have a mine that we, acquired here last year, and it sits right in the middle of a park system. And as we close that up, and kind of reduce our footprint on site, to just the long-term water treatment, it'd be nice to turn that back over into the park system and have it kind of get back to, a productive use, that enhances the local community that they can be using the site. Again, the water rights, and some sites have mineral potential, and maybe down the road there's some way of monetizing that. Again, we'd like to see it done responsibly, and and it probably won't be a bigger piece of our portfolio. Again, it's so tied to commodity pricing. Who knows, down the road something might happen. But right now, we just hold those mineral rights if we have them. If we convey the property, it usually goes with it. But again, the other thing here that really, kind of, sit well with me listening to the innovation is another part of what we do is also education and training. We're looking at some projects out in the West, for the closed and abandoned uranium mines, certainly on tribal lands. As if we were able to take on some of those and get them closed in long-term stewardship, a big component of that could be training, training and education for the local communities there, but also start looking for, promoting innovative technologies and so forth. That could become a really key part for us, and I kind of like that piece, and we need to think more about that. So when we put together a transaction and take it on, and come in, and again, it could be, old mine properties that sit, in the district here. If you have a landowner or a PRP wanting to just get out and looking for somebody who, might take it on and be, the long-term custodial, owner of that site, we'd look to kind of take on ownership of all these pieces of the property, and they get to be pretty complex. You may have property ownership, you may not. It may be, public land holdings, claims, leases, and that and so forth. But again, you become the steward of that. You have all the things of maintaining property, taxes, the regulatory ownership, like I talked about, technical ownership. You're now in charge of, all the technical issues of the site, whether it's, continued cleanup, ongoing inspection, monitoring, and maintenance of caps and covers, and certainly, ongoing responsibility for, maintaining treatment systems, running them, keeping them operational, and so forth. The financial piece, you're in charge of all of that. You have to find a way to make sure that you can cover all that ongoing work. There's also financial assurance requirements that often come along with orders, permits, and so forth. And you need to have, all of the bonding and all of those pieces in place. And that can be a pretty interesting way for how you creatively get that in place for these projects. And again, reuse, if there's any kind of, reuse of that site, we're very interested in looking at those, the more low impact, eco-friendly type uses. Just want to talk real quick. This is one area that we find fascinating and very interested in pursuing more of these type projects. These old historic drainage tunnels, and you guys know all about this. They're in about every district we have. You've got them here. Is what happens with these, down the road? And I'm thinking of places like Summitville. The Argo Tunnel, Leadville Tunnel, you certainly have a bunch out here, Mount Emmons, things like that, where now you have a water treatment plant put in. Does it go back to the state? Who's responsible for that? We'd be very interested in these type opportunities as well, as to come in and be the kind of take on ownership and long-term stewardship of these projects. The thing that becomes interesting here for us is obviously on the funding side, and if you taking it over from a governmental agency or something like that, there's all kinds of funding constraints and so forth you need to work through. But again, that just takes a bit more creativity on them. But again, it may be an interesting model for finding a new home for some of these projects as well. So again, just kind of some of the takeaways here. It's just a new model, different for finding a home for some of these projects that might not necessarily have a home, or also to get them into new ownership where a reluctant PRP or somebody who has the property but no desire to spend money on it and kind of drag their feet. Maybe it's a way to get them out of the process and have somebody else come in who is motivated to try to find solutions here. Again, I think as a public benefit corp, we look a lot different, we act a lot different, and it's a little easier to do business that way. Again, we're trying to be more, well, let me back up. In a lot of ways, it allows everybody to kind of hit the reset button. if there's been some ongoing, bad blood against the parties. It's a way to kind of put all that behind, kind of get a new path forward, and something that really is more in tune to getting results at the site. It's also kind of an interesting tool for settlements. If people are settling out under Superfund, this may be a nice way for them to come out, fund some sort of a transaction like this, and allow them to move on. It's also big, where we've seen it is on, on the mining side, certainly with mergers and acquisitions, companies that are acquiring other companies. It's a way to move some of those toxic assets out of the deal and let them transact more of a traditional business deal and allow those other assets to find a new home elsewhere. Okay, so that's kind of a new way of looking at transferring these sites. We can certainly answer more questions here as we kind of get to the end. I think next, Paul, you're going to talk for a little bit. Okay. All right. Thank you.